Hey everyone, Brian Doyle here, and welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. I've got a little bit of a special episode for you today. Today we are going to focus on the concept of the Office of VCIO. Now, this is a take from a webinar that I recently did. You will hear some references to VCIO Toolbox, but by no means is this meant to be an infomercial. What we're really talking about here is the process of building a team to serve as kind of this concept, the Office of VCIO. It's borrowed from the concepts that you'll see in the enterprise of the Office of CIO, where you've got a collective of program managers and project managers making sure things get done. So very similarly, we look at this as how we can align that conceptually to delivering QBRs and SBRs, fractional VCIO services and VCISO services. So again, this webinar really focuses on the structure of the team and why it's important and how you're going to leverage that to deliver. While you do hear some references on VCIO Toolbox, this is absolutely a program each and every one of you can build, whether you're using our tool or whether you're doing things in an ad hoc format or with one of my competitors. But it is concepts that you need to start ingraining into your life to kind of continue evolving your business review process, keeping it from getting stale and being able to really satisfy your clients. So with that said, I'm going to stop talking now and we'll see you inside the podcast. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Doyle, for those of you that might be attending for the first time, and I'm one of the co-founders here at VCIO Toolbox, and I want to welcome you all back to our weekly coaching sessions. This is something that we do every Tuesday at 3 p.m. from this week in September until the middle of July, and then we do take a few weeks off each summer to kind of regauge, regroup, and spend some time, with others. Summertime is meant for that, especially here in the Northeast, where I'm based out of, where it gets cold quickly. And I think some of you that might be living out this way, you're starting to experience that in the evening right now. But today we're really going to focus on the topic that, I love to chat about. You got some of you that have been coming to training have heard me talk about the Office of VCIO before, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the Office of VCIO, how it can be a collaborative approach to customer management. Now, this doesn't mean it's not something you can't leverage as a smaller organization. It just might mean people are wearing multiple hats. But we're really taking an approach to build a cohesive team that's acting as really a program management group and making sure that we're getting the job done for our customers. So today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how that process works, and then I'll kind of show you some of those updates that some of you might not be aware of in VCIO Toolbox to support the approach that we talk about today. But as we kick off, for anybody that has any questions, you can put them up into the chat box. That has now been opened up so you can communicate throughout the meeting with me. And if you've got any questions that we want to address during the Ask Me Anything session at the end of this call, you can do so from the Q&A section. But to kick things off, we're just going to define the Office of VCIO. And really, the Office of VCIO is something that we started looking at over here at VCIO Toolbox, as it's modeled from the Enterprise Office of CIO you'll find in a lot of large enterprise organizations, Fortune 500 organizations, that are doing true program and project management on behalf of the organization. So what we wanted to do is kind of take some of the principles from there, this program management piece, which is really what we're doing as VCIOs with our customers, right? We're delivering managed services. We're the ones that are managing that as a program. And then we're extending our capabilities to provide, the trusted advisor services that we do. And that's going to open up a discussion that we have at the tail end of the call about where we might be leaving money on the table and where we can develop some new recurring services. But the concept of the Office of VCIO is really to build a team-based approach to the advisory process. So what does that really mean? Well, there's this kind of common misconception out in the marketplace that your VCIO does everything, right? And a lot of times, even internally, we'll push a lot of effort onto the VCIO to maintain account management, but really it needs to be a team sport. And when we look at how we're going to do this, it's how do we construct a team where everybody has a well defined role, knows exactly what part they play? Because not everybody has to be customer facing in this equation, of course, and really make sure that we're doing what we need to do for each customer and that we're not going to run into potential relationship risk down the road. So we'll get into what the different roles are and how we approach that from each role with the customer. The other reason we want to build this approach is to get all team members, regardless of status in the organization, in tune with who our key accounts are, right? I don't know if you guys have ever experienced it. I certainly know I did when I was an MSP, where you would have some of your lowest level employees causing some of the biggest problems within the organization. Now, this has got nothing to do with them being good or bad employees, just sometimes they didn't know how to effectively communicate, or they would mistakenly not recognize who a key client was. And this often happens at the help desk level, at least it did in my experience. So, what we really want to do is get all of our team in tune with who the key accounts are that we're working with, make sure that they understand exactly who they're supposed to be engaged with. And when those phone calls come in, whether it's to the help desk, whether it's to your receptionist, whether it's somewhere else, we know who those really important accounts are to our livelihood, and we make sure that we're attending to them appropriately. Now, again, without sharing that information throughout the team, one account looks no different than another account, right? To those them that are not engaged. So we want to get the whole team involved in this. And as I mentioned earlier, if we do this correctly, it opens up the door for new revenue opportunity. So, what is the Office of VCIO model? So, the way I like to define it is really, different resources take different places within the work that needs to get done for a customer from the advisory standpoint. The VCIO will always be the lead, right? They're combining the business and tech focus here. They're going to be the advocate for the customer, and their job's to drive oversight of the relationship, certainly get feedback from the customer, on the daily or periodically, stay engaged with that customer to make sure that there's no relationship risk starting to brew or that nothing is falling between the cracks. And then ultimately drive a story that helps facilitate budgets that the customer takes action on. Let's face it, the QBR was built to be a place to retain customers, but also be a win for the MSP by bringing revenue back to us as well, right? So we need to make sure that we're taking that step. Now, the engineer, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, is really the thing that drives the bus and gets the inertia going. They are the ones responsible for stack alignment and identifying where those gaps are. They're going to do the assessments that we have as part of this process. And if they don't do their work in a timely fashion, everything in the VCIO sphere, whether it's in the Office of VCIO model or just traditional QBRs, tends to slow down to a crawl. So we'll get into some strategies around that as well. The VCISO or the analyst is really focused on security and compliance. I think many of you have seen the trend to a more compliance focused conversation, a more risk based conversation with your customers. A lot of it was predicated on the fact that cyber insurance has become more difficult to get, or if you get it, making sure your claim gets paid without carve outs. So the VCISO is taking on a much larger role in the conversation and needs to be considered as part of this overall account team. The customer success manager, that could be the VCIO in one, right? But some of my customers have scale where they're building out customer success teams to go with kind of the leadership teams that they're providing to their clients. But we got to collect and analyze that customer feedback. And, that's one of the things that I often see neglected in successful customer retention programs or, account management programs. We're not getting that periodic feedback from the right people. We've got those transactional ticket surveys that go out. We absolutely collect great information from them. It really gives us good end user sentiment and a good sense of, what's going on in real time down at that level. Certainly get out in front of problems quicker, right? But it doesn't tell us where the relationship risk might be brewing at the executive level. And as you all know, and those of you that have attended these trainings before, you know what I like to call the curse of the great MSP. The more we automate and the more we do remotely, the less we tend to be on site and the less things tend to break. And when we start running into that situation, we really start having a problem with with being able to stay engaged with our customers, they start questioning our value, and all of a sudden our bill becomes a conversation, right? So we want to stay in front of that and make sure that we're having regular intervals of getting success statistics, excuse me, back from our customers. And, we can do that through CSAT, Net Promoter Score, just a simple survey, and really make sure that we're staying on track at the executive level. And then finally, the executive team, right? Those folks need to be the escalation point. Now, this may assume that the executive team is different than your VCIO. For those of you that are owner-led VCIOs, well, you are where the buck stops, so the executive team is not required as much. But there are times if you're in a partnership, this is something that I did a lot when me and my partner first started our MSP and we were looking to scale. When I was working on my clients, he would play as the executive escalation point, and vice versa. When it was his frontline customers and in his role, I would play the executive leadership escalation point. So look at your own organization, see how you might be able to leverage that. But you definitely need to have an executive that's sponsoring this work to helpfully drive the action through these different people in the model. And the second part is being the one that can kind of get rid of any problems that might be hitting the customer at any given time. So now we move into the why you want to build the office of VCIO, and I've touched upon some of these things, right? The obvious one is staying close to your customer, keeping the whole team engaged with the clients, letting them all know what it's all about, and elevating the visibility to your customer in the gaps that they might be experiencing in process, policy, systems, and training. You're going to see more and more of the QBR conversation starting to focus around risk-based objects like policy, procedure, training concerns, as much as you're going to talk about infrastructure, health, and KPIs that live around there. We all know that the humans are the biggest hole in the process when it comes to security, and we need to start attending to that a little bit more in our QBRs. We also want to make sure that we're keeping our customers on top of threats, innovation out in the marketplace, changes that might be impacting their business. 18 months ago, we were barely talking about AI, and I think I saw Reed on the call. Reed is definitely spearheading the Microsoft Copilot, conversation out in the marketplace from his seat. So it's really good to, start looking at some of these innovative changes that we've got going on and get that out in front of your customer. I mean, what a great excuse to talk to them, right? Come with them with a threat they might need to consider or an innovation that they can talk about. And you're not just making that call that says, hey, how's things going? Good, great. Thanks for taking my call and moving on. So we really want to start building that as well. And you'll notice my little character over there on the right-hand side. Think of everything with a customer first approach. What would you want to be hearing if you were in that end user's shoes? What do you care about as the customer and not as the MSP? If you do this right, you're going to get everything you want as the MSP. So now we'll talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the VCIO. And as I mentioned, they're really the quarterback in this whole process. We'll stay on that whole football's back, which I get really excited about every year. But we'll get back into that approach of, the team play, right? These guys are the quarterback. They need to stay engaged with the customer. They got to have those regular touch points, those periodic check-ins, and those regular business reviews. And again, I want everybody to put away the word quarterly, and let's really start thinking more about strategic business reviews that we're delivering on a cadence that makes the most sense for the customer. We want to gather information from the client. We've got to understand what their stakeholders need. If we don't know their key initiatives and we don't know their blockers, it's going to be tough for us to be able to bring innovation or extend the use of systems. So we really got to listen to our client, right? That old 2 ears, 1 mouth conversation. We want to drive action. The whole point of putting the roadmap for us was always to sell more stuff, right? That's the simple statement. But really, if we do this effectively and we do it the right way with the customer, we're setting roadmaps and building a budget so they can A, stay on schedule, but B, better plan for the future and know when they're going to have big expenditure events. And if we position it and frame it a little bit differently, it takes on a whole new consultative value. And the VCIO is really responsible for driving that discussion. Obviously, I talked about it a few moments ago, but that continuing education as new threats are coming out, big changes are occurring, Microsoft programs change, things like that. We need to stay out in front of our customers. And then, of course, we're monitoring the health throughout that process. So that's really what the VCIO needs to be doing, whoever's in that role. Now, the engineers, like I said earlier, they're the tail that wags the dog, right? If they're not doing their assessment work, we can't get out and see the customers. I have a circle of life analogy I like to use when I'm talking about the responsibilities of the engineer. At the end of the day, they've got the most important part in the QBR process if we're strictly talking business reviews. They have to do that assessment. From that assessment, we're going to identify gaps in that environment. These are things that we got to make our customer aware of and oftentimes drive new projects to our roadmap. When those new projects get in the roadmap and we take them out and the VCIO takes them out to the customer, now they're sharing with the customer where they can make improvements and why they need to make these expenditures. If done right, these become sales. Sales continues to bring the revenue back into the company, and that revenue can be used to either expand the team so those overworked engineers can get some new friends to help them be a little bit less overworked, but more importantly, continue to pay the salaries that you're all earning and potentially those bonuses or commissions, depending on where you sit in the sphere as well. So it's really a circle of life. If we're not doing those business reviews, we run the risk, if not of losing the customer, at least of not getting the revenue on a regular schedule. And that can slow down all the downstream processes. But from a pure, so that's why the engineers should be on board. Hopefully you can use that to your advantage out there, because some of them do look at this as busy work, right? Penalty box work. Oh, I'm not being utilized today, so I got to do one of those assessments. And we've got to change the game and the complexion on that as part of this team approach as well. But really, the engineer is responsible for identifying those gaps during your assessments. They want to make sure that we're being contract compliant as well. Hopefully your gap analyses, certainly if you're using ours, you should be identifying areas within your contract that you might not be satisfying, right? Because that's an exposure and a hole for you in the organization. As things bubble up on the service desks or as they're doing implementations, bringing those issues up to the VCIO and management. Let us get out in front of that problem, right? Unfortunately, we work in technology. We've all been part of a bad installation, or we've had service tickets that just can't get fixed and the customer starts going from being acceptable of the situation into a little bit louder and then maybe a little unhappy with the situation. And the biggest thing you can do, especially as an engineer, is pass that off to your folks that are supposed to be the mouthpiece for you. A lot of the engineers I work with didn't like the conflict, right? So send that conflict to the people that need to address it, the VCIOs and the management teams, and let us get out in front of it before it becomes a big problem. We also want to look at identifying standardization opportunities. You guys the ones that are at the ground floor, those engineers and help desk folks, will have a bigger understanding of what systems are not meeting the tech stack needs, because that's probably where they're providing the service as well. So we want to make sure that they are identifying that and bringing those things, and other trends are seeing maybe the same problems happening in one of the applications or services they use repeatedly all the time, and share that information with your VCIO. The customer success manager, again, this can be the VCIO playing this role, but for those that have customer success teams, you've got to be sharing that information with the VCIO as you stay in tune with the temperature of that relationship. I've seen tandem sales teams where there's a hunter-farmer kind of account manager with a customer success person inside the office of VCIO. And they really, that person that's on the customer success side is really there to really play the day-to-day account manager and only bring things to that salesperson, if you will, when it needs some more direct touch. So you need those folks staying in tune with the temperature of the relationship, gauging it over time, and staying engaged. They can keep relevant information in front of the customer. I'm seeing more and more of the MSPs I'm working with doing monthly newsletters just to their client base with information that's important just to them, or sending articles, right? Somebody will see something that makes sense to a dentist organization or something, a law office, and send something specialized out and do little almost mini marketing blasts, right? Coming from the customer success team. So these are things that you can do to really, get those additional touch points that you might not be getting face to face. And then obviously they're managing contract calendar as well as contact calendar of those key accounts, making sure these business reviews are staying on pace, making sure things aren't falling through the crack, and certainly moving forward from there. Now, there's a growing need for a VCISO resource, and certainly this can be somebody internal on your team. That can be an external resource as well. If you do not have that security services that you might bring in and engage, we've got plenty of customers at VCIO Toolbox that have made relationships with external VCISOs to fill this gap. But obviously, you're seeing things really shifting to a security first focus. We can't stay one step ahead of the hackers, and we never will. We know that our humans are really the biggest hole in our environment, and we need somebody staying on top of policy and procedure to make sure what's going on in the organization and the way things are set up today really meet the needs for the future as time goes by. So really the VCISO staying in front of those new and emerging threats. They're coming out there and making sure your stack is doing what it is supposed to be doing for your customer, and they're looking for any of the gaps there. And where we're seeing emerging opportunities for the VCISO is really around the governance layer for the customer. You know, um, there's a lot of governance proof we need to make now in our cyber insurance applications. Proof that actions like annual reviews of policies, that we've got the right tools in and that they're being monitored on a continuous basis, like vulnerability scanning. Those kind of things are more and more becoming a big part of this process. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the MSP space to really offer governance as a service programs where you're becoming that oversight, where you're tracking policy, procedure, things that are getting done that need to be done and reported on, especially if your customer's regulatory compliant as well. And this is really something that I'm seeing some of my top performing MSPs converting into huge compliance as a service or VCISO as a service opportunities. So if you're not doing that, definitely think about it. If you don't have those resources, come talk to me. I can certainly align you with other VCIO Toolbox users that could potentially support you. But there's a growing need for the VCISO to be part of this overall VCIO team, and their role, as I just talked about, is really staying on top of everything from a security level, making sure that the stack is meeting the needs of the customer, but more importantly, meeting the needs of the industry at large, and then really taking it, making sure that things don't fall through the cracks from a security perspective, similar that to what the VCIO is doing and the customer success managers are doing from the account based standpoint. The executive role is really where the buck stops. You've got to have executive buy-in to have a good VCIO program. I think most of you I see on the call here are part of leadership teams, and you know that the QBR process goes only as the executive team pushes it. There is always a bigger fire to undertake somewhere in your business that can derail the business reviews happening in a timely fashion. Engineers were busy before, they will always be busy later. And as I said, they sometimes view this as penalty box work. So we got to make sure that just the normal fires that are the reason we have jobs don't derail the QBR programs. So they've got to be the buck stops there internally, but also externally with the customer. When the customer starts having problems and our team's kind of going back and forth, and it gets to this point where you can see the customers getting unhappy, the VCIO is probably able to make recommendations or take action to a certain point. But when it starts becoming fiduciary, a potential lawsuit, those kind of issues, or just really a risk to losing the customer, you got to get an executive involved. And that executive's got to be open to picking up the phone and making that call too. So the customer knows you care, recognize that there's a problem. And if some action needs to be taken, maybe a discount, maybe a month of free, maybe just I'm sorry, mea culpa, those things are occurring as well. And they need to be the executive to executive liaison in the larger organizations too. In your larger organizations, some of those top level executives, if you're in some co-managed environments, only want to deal with the vetoes of your organization as well. So, certainly that's got to be there. So you really, the executive does play a key role, albeit a smaller role, in the office of VCIO to make sure that the train's chugging, to make sure that people feel comfortable coming to them, open door policy, if you will, with problems without any fear of retribution or penalty on their side. Why did you let it get this far? We all know technology can escalate in a day, right? So what is the modern day TBR? Oops, notice we cross out the T. I really want you guys starting to think of these as strategic business reviews as you move forward. They are technology business reviews. There's a huge technology component, but we got to get much more strategic in our conversations with our customers to really be sticky and play that leadership, advisor role. And in that modern day SBR, the focus needs to be on the customer. So this is kind of the five-step approach that obviously VCIO Toolbox lends to, but I think it logically lays out the way you can engage with your customer in a QBR process, but then expanding that out to even build a much more engaged fractional VCIO program if that's one of your goals. Now, you'll notice also it's a continuous circle because everything ties into the part before it and then comes right back around. So we work, as many of you know, to build that joint strategic plan with our customer. Really, we want to work with them to understand what are the key objectives they're going after and the obstacles in the way of success. And those things become markers that we can tie our projects and services to and really help the customer see the business outcome they can expect from the projects. But before we can build any projects, we have to do our IT operations analysis, which is that gap assessment, right? Where our engineers come into play. There, we're looking for those gaps in process, people, system, and security. And from those gaps, we're going to make recommendations. In conjunction with that gap assessment, we're doing an asset management process. I like to call it asset governance here as we continue to expand the integrations coming into VCIO Toolbox. And the reason for that is we're not just looking at product lifecycle components, but if you're using the existing vulnerability scanners that we connect with and some of the ones that we've got upcoming, you're going to be able to bring that vulnerability scoring into it as well. So we can show perfectly healthy or perfectly lifecycle ready assets, right? Ones that are not expired out, but still show that they've got significant problems. Maybe they're, way behind in patching or have application patches that nobody thought about that have to be attended to. And these could be areas of exploit for your environment. So we're really looking at more of an asset governance conversation, probably bigger than the life cycle these days, since a lot of what we have with the move to the cloud with most of our folks is really our endpoints. So that's a huge part that we're looking at. Something we've introduced into the VCIO toolbox process, but many of you were doing potentially outside of that, was risk management. And what we mean by risk management is, hey, great, we've identified those gaps during our assessment, but now we want to look at those gaps and go, hey, what's the impact to the business and what's the likelihood of this happening? We really want to quantify those risks, and then we can bring them into a centralized risk register. This was native in our GRC system for quite some time, but we only extended it out to be able to be leveraged in the QBR this summer because many of our GRC clients are going, yo, I want to bring those risks in from the other side as well. And it totally made sense that we want to track those risks that might not get covered in the security assessment, i.e. infrastructure concerns, application concerns, and bring them into the risk matrix as well. So we now have a risk register within the system, but even if you weren't utilizing the system, you can quantify and identify those risks so you can put a really nice prioritization for the customer. Again, we're there to guide them, Sherpa them, and help them make more informed, more confident decisions that don't rely on blind faith. And we can do that by quantifying the risk. Now, all those steps feed into building a budget and roadmap, right? We've identified gaps in the projects and services that might come out of that. We've listened to our customers and built our strategic plan so we know any new initiatives that are going out there, and we can get those aligned to the strategic plan. And ultimately, that budget and roadmap really gives us an opportunity to really have a more consultative based conversation with our customer. We can show how things tie to the strategic plan. We can show them how it ties to the risk management plan. We're able now in VCIO Toolbox to be able to show risk and impact right there. Strategic alignment and impact right there within the recommendation section when we're using the meeting and presentation view. So these are all good things to really tie that conversation together and make sure the customer understands all these items that I was just talking about that I didn't pop up here for you. But, hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of where the modern day TBR looks like. And that risk review is really just giving a very visual view of where risk lives for your customer. People are visual. Our business folk on the other side of the table tend to not speak in technical terms oftentimes. And we want them to understand the risk that they're facing. So what you're seeing there is a simple industry standard heat map view of where risk lives. impacts and likelihoods are being identified. And then in this case, you're just seeing how many risks live in each one of those boxes. But by adding those probabilities, you can have a very simple story with your customer. Hey, our goal is obviously to get as much of that risk to the bottom left hand corner as quickly as we can. And we want to make sure that we're taking our top priority risks and addressing those first. So those things you're seeing up there in the red boxes, those are the ones we really want to take care of first if budget allows, and then we'll move downstream. So it really gives you an opportunity to leverage this risk concept that's native to the GRC conversation and bring it into that business focus again under the Office of VCIO. Now, once you get all this put together, as I mentioned a few moments ago, you're correlating that data to drive decisions. You're taking all that information about impact and likelihoods that you identified in risk management, tying it together with the budget and the roadmap, and then feeding that back to show the outcomes the customer can expect from your strategic plan. When you can tell a customer where risk lives and what business outcomes they're going to get from that process, we have seen and spoken with our customers, and what we're hearing is it cuts down the sales friction and basically makes these deals come in 30 to 60 days earlier than they traditionally were coming in previously. And that's because we've taken all the mystery out of the project. The customer knows well in advance how much it's going to cost, at least a directional view of how much it's going to cost. They know exactly what the risk is to their business, and they can make an educated decision if that's a risk they're willing to accept or that's a risk they want to fix. And then ultimately, how it ties back to the strategic plan gives them a sense of what business outcomes that project's contributing to. Then they can look at those business outcomes and determine the value back to the organization. So, this really brings everything to a center, empowers even some of the most junior VCIOs now to have those business-based discussions. And this whole concept of the Office of VCIO with executive escalation empowers those junior VCIOs to feel more confident because they know that they're not just sitting there as a team of one trying to communicate to somebody that they feel is much senior to them what's going on. They know that they've got a team of professionals that were backing them and getting them to that decision. And obviously, that's something that they can share and showcase during a meeting with the client as well. Now, all of this gives the opportunity to get this to the next level of, recurring opportunities. Everything we talked about today might be driving the SBR to a degree, but you can see very quickly there's areas that you can expand upon, go deeper, and start looking at building fractional VCIO or VCISO offerings. And these offerings are creating new recurring revenue. My top performing MSPs, again, that have built VCISO programs over the last 18 months, 2 years, are getting anywhere from $1,500 to about $5,000 in new recurring revenue through building out either a fractional VCIO or VCISO program. More so probably on the VCISO side. The fractional VCIO candidly does play a little bit better in co-managed situations than it does sometimes, or at least in situations where there's staff that do IT work. But the fractional VCISOs for almost any business that you're engaging in, again, our marketplace, that small to mid-size, they don't often have CISOs on their team, and this gives us the opportunity to step in there and do right.